Hey guys, welcome back to our series on how to paint your guitar with Behlen's guitar finishing kit. In our last video we kind of introduced the kit, I showed you what was in it, and we got a couple coats of sealer sprayed on this guitar body. So you can see that there's now this kind of satin shine to it. That's what you're looking for with your sealer. That means, well, generally speaking, that means it's nice and sealed, but you've got to look and make sure that it's sealed everywhere. So I've got two coats on here. The instructions recommend that you let your coat of sealer dry for 30 to 45 minutes, and then you sand it with 320 grit paper, which they've provided, and then you can spray it again. A couple coats is generally good, especially if you have a fairly closed grain wood that's nice and smooth. If you've got a fairly open grain wood and you see that your sealer is soaking in and leaving dry spots, sanding back and putting on another coat of sealer can save you multiple coats of your lacquer after. So if you don't want to be spraying stringed instrument lacquer all friggin' day, make sure you get the wood sealed up at the sealer stage so that you don't have to use that thinner material to try and do it later. So now I've got a couple coats on here. Mine appears to be sealed up to my satisfaction. So what I'm going to do now is sand that sealer with the 320 grit paper to prepare the guitar for the color. So basically how it works, if I'm not mistaken here, and I'll continue to follow along through the instructions because they're the instructions that you guys will be getting when you buy the kit, if you buy the kit, or when you win it, if you win it in my 20,000 subscriber contest, which depending on when you view this video may be out or may have already come out and be over or may not be out yet, obviously. Anyway, so now I'm going to sand this with some 320 grit paper. I like to fold the paper back and forth and then tear it down the middle. You can also cut the sandpaper with scissors, but don't use good scissors because, funnily enough, sandpaper ruins scissors. We're going to sand this now to make sure it's nice and smooth, make sure it's nice and flat, and to make sure that the lacquer will stick to it properly, even though the lacquer probably would stick to it no problem anyway. Use a sanding block if you've got one. Again, I'm trying to demonstrate this with only the stuff that came in the kit, so I'm not using one. If you're not using a sanding block, try to avoid sanding with your fingers. A lot of people like to sand with their fingers because they get good pressure. It's one thing if you're doing the pockets, the horns and cutaways with your fingers, but try to use your palm as much as possible for everything else because it will prevent you from putting kind of ridges in there from your fingers, which may seem a little ridiculous, but it is something that happens. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my palm and my sandpaper, which I've torn in half and then folded in three, and I'm going to try and sand the entire surface, get rid of that satiny shine that it has, and take it back to matte, just so I know I've kind of got it all. And so I know that my lacquer will stick when I start onto that. Now be careful when you're sanding, double check your paper and make sure that the sealer isn't pilling up on there, that you're not getting like a weird buildup of sealer kind of in clumps on your paper, because that can cause problems where your sealer then won't sand. Your paper basically won't sand things smoothly if it does that. But we've got lots of paper, so if it starts to do that on one side, I mean, you've got the whole sheet. It's folded into three per section of halves that I've torn it into here. So I've got basically 6 of these sections that I can go through to get this thing sanded. If you're doing a guitar with a carved top and you want to be able to do this sanding on the carving, and if you're having any trouble, what you can do is tear a long strip or cut a long strip off and then press your hand into the area where it's carved in and pull the paper through. Okay, it would be the same as, I mean, you can use it in these areas, but it's not necessary. If I were to do this and pull the paper through with the pressure of my hand holding it down, all right, you can use that through the horns as well, but it can be a bit awkward. So generally speaking, I don't bother. You guys don't need to sit here and watch me sand the whole guitar, so I'll come back when I've got it sanded and ready for the lacquer. All right guys, so once you've got that sanded down so it's all nice and smooth and and well, dulled out a little bit, honestly. Now you're ready to start spraying, basically. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with the back. If you have somewhere where you can spray the whole thing at once, then excellent. But because I'm sure most of you don't, and I'm just using a table here, I'm going to start with the back of the guitar. So what I'm going to do, I need to protect the front from the paint. I'm going to do the back and sides in a brown, and then I'm going to do a burst on the front, which is going to involve a brown around the outside, and maybe an amber further in, possibly natural wood in the middle. Hard to say. Anyway, I'm going to start with the back and sides. In order to protect the front from getting paint on it, I'm going to mask the cutaway here. Now, eventually the outside of the cutaway is going to be getting the same color. It's going to be getting that brown when I do the sunburst. So I'm not too concerned about making sure that I get every last centimeter of it right up to the edges, but I'm going to get as close as I can without wasting a bunch of time. Shouldn't be particularly difficult to do that. It only takes a few pieces of tape. So I'm going to lay some tape on there. Then I'm going to grab a razor blade and just kind of carefully cut off the excess. Okay, so now that that's trimmed back, obviously you've noticed that the only part that I've masked is the carve here, and that's because I'm going to flip this whole thing downward like this, and by virtue of the fact that it's sitting against the table, it's all going to be protected except for that area that's carved away. So now when I spray this from the sides and from the top, which is the back in this case, none of it's going to get on the front. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my brown that came in the package, the brown guitar toner. I'm going to give it a good shake for a minute or two, and I'm going to throw on my mask, and then we're going to give this a first coat and see how it looks and see if we need another coat. Remember, when you're doing this, it's going to be probably 8 to 10 inches away with the can, slightly overlapping strokes, about 40 or 50% overlap. And if this is anything like the last can of guitar toner from Behlen that I tried, it's a good can. It sprays quite quickly, so be aware of that. Maybe test it on something else first. Again, it's a good can, so it's easier to get a good coat when the can sprays quickly, but if it catches you off guard, you can leave a big puddle, and that is a bad thing, particularly with lacquer. We're supposed to be doing this in relatively light coats, so test the can before you go ahead and spray it on your guitar. So here we go. I just give the can a quick test shot onto the paper, make sure it's spraying properly, and then I start trying to put it on, not too heavy, reasonably thin. With this transparent stuff, you do have to be careful. If you don't build it up reasonably evenly, you will be able to see kind of lighter and darker areas in it. So just keep that in mind when you're doing it. Make sure you get a decent overlap on your strokes. I like to start with the edges, as you can see here, because then the overspray gets onto the top and it's kind of easy to deal with it. As I go over the top, it just encompasses all of that overspray and gets rid of it, and it's not really an issue. So I just go through here and carefully spray the edges. Of course, when the guitar is horizontal like that, that's when the edges are the hardest part, because you can get runs in them very easily. So particularly on those inside rounds, you kind of got to go light and be very careful not to put these, not to spray it too heavy and create runs essentially. So now the top's pretty straightforward. Just overlap your strokes about 50%. If you can, you'll see in here I leave a couple of light spots on as I'm going through, and I have to go back and correct them like I just did there, just because I've missed that 50% mark. I've got the can fairly far away here, so it's not particularly difficult to go back and correct those either. At this point you can tell it's a pretty dark brown, and I'll talk about that again later, but the fact that it's dark, kind of means that it's going to have a more powerful build-up quicker, so those dark and light streaks will be more apparent. So you do have to be careful. Here I'm going through and putting in a second coat to kind of darken it up some more, which will make it easier for it to even out because it becomes closer to opaque when I do that. However, because this is so dark, it ends up looking almost black, as you'll see. So there it is after the second coat. It's got a nice gloss. It's very, very dark, but it looks good. All right, guys, so as you can probably tell, I wanted a fairly dark brown on here. As you go darker with these, because these are, you know, guitar toners, they're tinted lacquers, they're somewhat transparent. As you go darker and you add more coats, it becomes easier to get it kind of even looking, if that makes sense. So I went 2 coats, you know, medium coats. They weren't super light. Lighter might have been better. But yeah, 2 medium white coats, and I've got this very dark brown on here now. So the Encore brown guitar toner is a fairly dark color. Now I'm gonna let this dry probably for a couple days, just to make sure that it's good and hard, so that when I flip the guitar over to put the burst on the front, it isn't, you know, it doesn't create a mess. When I do the burst, I'm probably gonna put the brown on considerably lighter, I would think. Maybe not, well, I mean, it's gonna fade. So it'll be nice and dark and probably match this right around the edge, and then it'll kind of fade into a lighter color the way a burst should. So that's it for today. That's how you prep your sealer for paint and do the back and sides of the guitar if you're putting a color on them. There's also the StarCast Amber that comes with this kit, so you can use that on the back and sides instead if you want, and you can leave the front plain or whatever you want. I mean, it's up to you guys how you choose to use the various toners and the color options that you get. But yeah, I'm doing the brown on the back and sides, and I'm going to do a burst with it on the front, and probably try and include some of the amber in there so that you can see that as well. So that's it for today. In the next episode of this, or the next part of the series, we will do the sunburst on the front, which is one of the most intricate parts. There's a trick to creating a template for it if you're not able to spray it by hand. So I'm going to do that so that you can see how that's done. And then from there, we'll be moving on to the clear coat. So I hope you guys found this video useful. If the contest is still on and you're eligible to win it, make sure you participate. It's a great kit. It's something I think most of you will probably be interested in having. And even if the contest isn't still on, check it out online. I'll put the link in the description to go see it. You might want to consider getting one. So thanks for following along, and as always, we'll see you next time. Have a good one.